I thought I should raise the question of Kashmir, on which you have spoken, and also on, most important, the assault on free speech, the climate of repression, and also we don't want to let my tribe off the hook. The performance of the media during this period.
I'm very worried about Kashmir. 75 lakh people have been under a virtual siege since August 4. An 84-year leader, a former chief minister of Kashmir, is under PSA, and that case is not being heard. The habeas corpus petitions are piling up. They are not being heard. Now, the highest principle in a democracy is liberty of an individual. You know what Benjamin Franklin said. If you sacrifice a little liberty in order to get a little security, you deserve neither liberty nor security. Liberty of an individual is the hallmark of a civilized democratic nation. All other values, according to me, rank below liberty. Here are 75 lakh people denied liberty, denied internet, denied access to their families, denied classrooms for their children. They write exams, but they don't go to classes. Denied access to hospitals, denied the right to walk on the streets and shop and buy and sell. This is the biggest siege in India. This is a siege. And yet, our system is not outraged by the siege and protesting. And the government says again and again, everything is normal. How can you say everything is normal? How can you even use those words? You have a whole army occupying Kashmir. I'm not wishing that violence breaks out in Kashmir. I plead with my Kashmiri brethren, don't resort to violence and give up arms. A few people who are misled, give up arms. But I grieve with you that you are under siege. Your liberty is being taken away. That's why when I stepped out and breathed freedom, my first paragraph was on Kashmir. I said, this is completely unacceptable. This is not expected of a democratic country. This is not expected under a republican constitution. You have to give back that freedom to the people. And if there are some protests, we'll have to face the protests. If there is minor violence, you'll have to contain the violence and plead with them to give up violence and contain it. But you cannot suppress people. If this can happen to one state, why cannot happen in another state tomorrow? Then what is the moral right for you to talk about China and Uyghur province? What is the moral right to talk about Sri Lanka and north and eastern provinces of Sri Lanka? What is our moral right then? We have no moral right. I'm very worried about Kashmir. I try to keep in touch on the telephone. My friend Saifuddin Soz sent me an email and he said, it will take my PA 10 days to find a place where I can send this email. I hope this email you will get. And your reply, I don't know how long it will take for me to get. I sent him an email. I don't know if he got it. He's in detention. Why is my friend Umar in detention? I can't understand. Why is he in detention? He's the most pacific fellow I know. Why is Mufti's daughter hiding in another city of India? Mehbooba Mufti's daughter is taking shelter in another city in India. She's not in Delhi. Why? Why are these people denied access to their families? I'm very worried about Kashmir. The other issue asked about is
the assaults on free
Yes.
speech and the climate of fear.
Look what's happening. Now, I know this is sub judice, but let me be careful. What is this trial going on in Pune and Bombay against these activists? Sudha Bharadwaj is a terrorist? The other four are terrorists?
We hope those cases will be dropped now with the new government.
I hope so.
As
I
long
don't
as it
know. I
lasts.
sincerely hope so. I'm going to try. I'm a Maharashtra MP. But it shocks my conscience to say Sudha Bharadwaj is a terrorist. Sudha Bharadwaj may be a completely outraged citizen of India with very extreme views, but certainly she's not a terrorist, and the whole lot of others.
And a comment on the performance of the media, you touched upon it in your
I
statement.
did. I didn't exclude the media. I said the media is included in this indictment.
Why do you think they're so intimidated?
Because the reality is, the media today is not editor-driven, but publisher-driven. Most papers don't care who the editor is, as long as their advertisement manager is smart. Now, I don't blame the media because they lose on every copy they print. Every copy they print, they lose money. They have to live on advertisement. Many of them have gone online, but they have not monetized their online. And even the monetized part is a pittance. Google pays them a pittance. Google keeps most of it. So they have to advertise. They have to depend on advertisement. And the biggest advertiser is the government. One day I saw in Times of India, 16 pages of some land acquisition advertisement. No, that's a bonanza. There's no application of editorial mind. 16 pages that comes, I believe, in a CD or something. You just print it, feed it into the computer machine and print it. 16 pages. Now, I'm happy that they are making money. But you must write. And even the Times of India, let me compliment it, because I think it's the most establishment paper today. Even the Times of India today has said, reverse the CAB in an editorial. It's a rare occasion where I'll compliment the Times of India editorial, but let me compliment it.
The Hindu wrote quite
Hindu
strongly
wrote earlier,
against
of
it.
course. Hindu
The
wrote
others,
strongly
Telegraph.
editorials.
Yeah.
Telegraph is the most anti-establishment paper.
And the TV channels?
Well, I think the regional channels are better. The Hindu has, I said, there are flashes of exception. Hindu has written a half a dozen to a dozen editorials which are quite thumping and challenging. But they also have to run a business in this country. They also have to run a business. The regional channels are better, I think. I think this guy, Ravish Kumar, and
Yes.
NDTV Hindu is outstanding. He doesn't care for anyone. He just speaks his mind.
I know a number of young men and young women. We meet them at our Asian College of Journalism, with which I'm associated. They go with idealism. They're strongly for freedom of the press. But when they go to the newsroom, the whole game changes.
Well, they're under instructions. I mean, I'm telling you, this is here Arvind Subramaniam writing a paper with John Feldman, drawing upon your own data, government data. He has given the source, graphs, and he's written a paper. Why is the media not publishing this paper? I think it was hinted at Neemrana. Then I got in touch with my friend Praveen, and I said, where is the paper? He said, it will be published in a day or two. I got it day before yesterday night or yesterday. I've read the paper. Now, this is available today. Why are the newspapers not highlighting this paper? They should. This is research, this is knowledge, this is content. It must be available to the people of India. Well, I think this is a argument you can't win or lose. There are constraints on newspapers. Within those constraints, there are exceptional performances. But by and large, the media has been a disappointment.
And on that note of questioning why the media and by extension all of us are not speaking out, whatever be your opinion on the issues that matter, why there's ultra caution in the public debate or discourse on these issues, I turn it over to questions. I'll be moderating the questions. Please keep them relevant and short. And please identify yourselves in every case so we know where the question is coming from.
My name is Raju Rajagopal. I represent a group called Hindus for Human Rights, which has been formed in the USA to speak up for pluralism and democracy. My question is to do with Kashmir. I just spent a whole day with a family from Kashmir who have come from Srinagar to Pune. And as they were describing it, what the situation is, one of the references they made was, we have seen worse things before under the previous governments. Only the difference now is the amount of hatred, including the army raising apple orchards on a wholesale basis. So my question, sir, is the role of the previous governments, did they establish certain precedents in terms of what is happening in Kashmir that this government has built upon and made it worse? In other words, should Congress also not take the responsibility for some of the repressive measures that have become norm now? Thank you.
Is this some kind of inherited sin? If there was a government at that time which made mistakes, that government bears responsibility. Nobody is denying that Congress government at the center had made grave mistakes in Kashmir. The rigged election, which started militancy, the sacking of Farooq Abdullah. You can go back to the sacking of Sheikh Abdullah and incarceration in Kodaikanal. So you can go back. But remember, we opened a new chapter in UPA. Militancy was brought to the bare minimum. Just look at the graph. Look at the data. Number of infiltrations, number of militants killed, number of security forces killed, number of citizens killed, civilians killed, dramatically came down to single digit. We appointed interlocutors. For the first time, people came out and spoke to the interlocutors. I led a delegation joined by Arun Jaitley to Jammu and Kashmir. Thousands came to see us and poured their heart and feelings and said, this is what we want. We had started a new dialogue in Kashmir. That was interrupted in 2014 by the change of government. But this government, bless them, until 2015, they continued the same policy. It is only in 2015, for some strange reason, they changed course and went back to a muscular nationalist approach, which I say is wrong. Up to 2015, they were doing pretty well. And I, in fact, complimented the government for continuing the same policy of dialogue and negotiation and up to 2015. Since 2015, things have dramatically changed and drifted inexorably.
If I remember right, as a Home Minister, you advocated a reduction in the security.
We did reduce. 10,000 central paramilitary forces were removed from Kashmir. 10,000. We removed all the roadblocks in Srinagar city. The then DGP and I rode in an unmarked jeep through Srinagar after the roadblocks had been removed. Nothing happened. Yes, there was a sense of apprehension for a few days, but things quietened down. And for the first time, during 2012, 13, and early 14, people were on the banks of the Dal Lake as late as 11:30 at night. And bless the Modi government, they continued it up to the mid of 2015. I still don't understand why they changed course.
Yes. Yes, please introduce yourself.
I am Dr. Gopala Dwarkanath from Boston. So first of all, great privilege and honor to listen to such a brilliant lecture this evening. I have two questions, one on media, another one on economy. Regarding media in United States, this term fake news was never there before 2016. Now we're unable, it's riddled with news. We don't know which is fake and which is real. We're unable to filter through that to get a reasonably accurate information. Does such a thing happen in India? You know, is that an issue?
Well, there's a lot of fake news here. A lot of fake news. And US also, there's always been a lot of fake news. Clinton-Trump election was full of fake news, and they used to run fake news as the news is unfolding and fact check on the other column.
The second one is a quick one on economy. You sounded very ominous, and this is not in a good situation right now. We are in India. Comparing it to the Great Recession, do you think if this is left unchecked, it would head towards being one of the great recessions in the Indian economy?
No, there is a recession otherwise in the world. There are many countries close to recession. A couple of countries are already in recession. There's a slowdown in global growth. But notwithstanding the slowdown in global growth, it's our duty to shore up our economy. And there are measures which can be taken to shore up our economy. We can't go back to 8%. When there's a slowdown in global growth, you can't go to 8%. But you can at least anchor your growth at 6% or 6.5%. We're now down to 4.5. And remember the Arvind Subramaniam's other comment. This 4.5 is not the real 4.5. This is equal to the old 3 because the methodology has changed. But I'm willing to ignore that point. We have to shore up our economy so that we don't fall below 6%. Raghuram Rajan did some calculation and said, it's only at 8% you create net employment. At 6%, you perhaps maintain existing levels of employment. At 4 and 4.5%, you lose jobs. There's net unemployment at this level of growth. Therefore, it's very important that we maintain employment in this country. You don't lose jobs. So you must grow at 6%. And if the world turns, you grow at 8%, you create more employment. There are different levels of different consequences. No? How can you live with 4.5% in a developing country?
Evening. My name is Advan Adityan, and I'm from the Daily Tandi Group. My question is...
Where are you?
Yeah, right here.
Oh, right here.
To the lights.
Right here, sir. Sorry.
It's being covered live and also...
Come here.
Oh, should I come?
Just come forward.
Yeah, come forward.
Yeah, there you are.
Yes. Thank you, sir, for this amazing opportunity. My question to you today is, where do we go from here? What responsibilities can the youth or media houses or other corporates take up to achieve this goal of liberty for all individuals?
See, this government is only 7 months old. It has got 4 years and 5 months. They have a massive majority, 303. So the reality is we have to live with this government. All we can do is try to persuade them, try to correct their course. That's all that in a democracy we can do. But if that fails, it will spill over into the streets. And then they'll be forced to correct course. I am hoping that they will correct course through dialogue, through discussion, through debate, through reasoning. But if they are forced to correct course because of street riots, so be it. What can I do? It's similar to the Hong Kong situation today. The ruler doesn't listen to the people.
No, right there. He got up first after that. Please introduce yourself.
My name is N. Ravi, and I was wondering what the connection between two parts of what you said would be. That is,
Ravi.
the impact of divisive economic policies on the national mood and on the economy, quite apart from how the economy is managed. The impact should be obvious, but I'm asking this question only because of the experience in the United States, where despite Donald Trump's divisive policies, the economy seems to be doing well.
See, there's no comparison between the US and India. One of my earliest lessons I was told is don't compare numbers of US and numbers of India. For example, let me give you one example. We are obsessed with fiscal deficit, correct? Every revenue secretary will tell you, every finance secretary will tell you, sir, watch out the fiscal deficit. America doesn't care a damn about the fiscal deficit. They don't care a damn. But they are the reserve currency. Everybody puts his money there. Where does China put its money? Where does India put its money? We put it in America. So there's no comparing America and India. America is doing well because of its great universities, its great research capability, innovative capability, and the willingness to take risk. And people are investing in America. Other countries are putting their money in America. So America's economy is on autopilot, despite Trump. They create 288,000 jobs a month, 250,000 jobs a month. Trump is on his own trip. He knows that the economy is doing well. And he's on his own trip dividing his people. Who knows? He may get elected also again. Can't say. There was no comparing America and India. Here, unfortunately, every decision of government has an immediate consequence upon the lives of millions of people. If you raise GST, I thought this is a no-brainer. If you raise GST, will not demand be further suppressed? In a situation like this, you cut regressive taxes and you don't cut progressive taxes. But they're doing the exact opposite. For every decision has a consequence here, which is why all of us are worked up about the decisions they are threatening to take. And therefore say, please don't take these decisions. Hold consultation. Get people to advise you on the right course of action. If your chief economic advisor tells you it is cyclical, what can you do? You can only throw up your hands.
Ravi, do you have a follow-up question?
I was wondering if you could elaborate on the impact of divisive policies on the economy.
Divisive policies on the economy, you see, I don't think a divisive policy, a socially divisive policy, has a direct impact on the economy. But to the extent that there are sections of the people who are already the underclass, underprivileged, less access to education, less access to jobs, less access to services, less access to capital. A divisive economy will only make them more suspect. Only make them more deprived. See, there's empirical evidence, huge empirical evidence, that in an interview, the Muslim candidate has less chance than a Hindu candidate. Now, you can't deny that. That's all empirically established. Now, a divisive policy will make the Muslim more suspect in the eyes of the other people. Even if he is genuinely excluded, he will say he's been excluded because he's a Muslim. So a socially inclusive policy will give them encouragement and hope. A socially divisive policy will dampen their enthusiasm and hope. That is the only connection I can make at the moment. I've not reflected on it deeply, between a socially divisive policy and economic consequences. It will happen. You go to a bank for credit. If you fan the flames of divisiveness, it's possible that most bankers will look upon many more Muslims with suspicion. It can happen in other walks of life. It's happening in housing today. In private housing, it's happening every day. Nobody wants to give a house and rent to a Muslim. In Ahmedabad, nobody can find a house for a Muslim except in the 2 areas which are populated by Muslims. Therefore, socially divisive policies have consequences in access to services and goods and jobs. I think they do have. Reflecting on it more, housing is a classic example.
PC, you liberally quoted Arvind Subramanian as an experienced economist. In today's paper in Times of India, the other experienced economist, Arvind Panagaria, has said that all things are not all too bad. He has also had a lot of experience with the government, and he has given data that this type of depressions or depressions and peaks are not unusual. It has happened continually. You also mentioned it happened in 2001. Later, you gave the instance. Aren't you partial in selecting this as a lawyer or as a Ram as a journalist, in taking a one-sided view because of politics or other differences? No. Go to the case of your own politicians. Rahul Gandhi has been successfully calling the Prime Minister as a chore. And your spokesperson every day do the same thing without any concern. There is not a single word of appreciation of any of the aspects of the government. Say, like, for example, the health policy and things like that. Why are you all so one-sided, and aren't you contributing so much to the divisiveness of the economy, of the polity?
No, I deny your accusation. I read Arvind Panagaria regularly and religiously. In his criticism, Arvind Panagaria agrees with us. He's against increasing import duties. He's against raising GST. No. Therefore, he agrees with our criticism. What he's trying to say is, the criticisms are valid, but there is still a way out by doing this and doing that. Even today, he says, we can overcome the present slowdown by doing this and do that. Fine, do it. Hire him. Why did you fire him? Of course he was. Of course he was. Of course he was fired. Everybody knows that.
Jagdish Bhagwati, Professor of Economics at Columbia University.
Of course he knows. Everybody knows he was fired. Everybody in Delhi knows he was fired. Because he was questioning them on some areas, and he was asked to go. Then you will say Arvind Subramanian was not fired. The whole world knows Arvind Subramanian was virtually fired. I mean, fired in the sense that you go your way, we go our way. All I'm saying is accept. We accept Arvind Panagaria. Hire him tomorrow. Go by his advice. Mend the economy. I'll be happy. You think I want India to be a basket case? I don't want India to be a basket case. I want India to be a prosperous country. Hire Arvind Panagaria. You can't have it both ways. You can't say Arvind Panagaria is right, but I will have nothing to do with him. How can you say that? You did mention about chore and all, but that's not the subject. But just as a side story, let me tell you, the word chore was first used against a sitting prime minister by the BJP and others when Rajiv Gandhi was prime minister, where they coined the jingle, Gali Gali Mein Chor Hai. So don't forget history. The word chore against a sitting prime minister was first used against Rajiv Gandhi. I'm not saying this is correct, but equally you should say that was wrong.
Viswanathan, you might want to question your own thinking on one-sidedness. If people have come to a conclusion after their own analysis and so on, why would you characterize it as one-sided? They have clear views. He has views which may be different from mine on several issues, but on some issues you agree. So how is it one-sided? You have the other side broadcasting all the time.
Well, the other side is there on every channel every day.
Viswanathan, a chartered accountant. You mentioned 6 reasons as to why the current economic slowdown has come to be.
Actually, my column last Sunday. Oh, you were talking about economic slowdown?
Yes.
Sorry.
You mentioned the 6 reasons. You have mentioned it in your column and you also prefaced it in your initial talk. You didn't touch upon the twin balance sheet problem of the banks because of the accumulated bad loans. And it's very evident that most of these bad loans happened during the previous regime. What is your comment on that?
Factually not correct. You see, we had a boom period. 2003-04, towards the latter half, to up to 2010-11. Investment was booming. Therefore, credit had to be extended. In fact, the latest paper, Arvind Subramaniam, talks about the 4 balance sheet crisis. You might be interested. Since you mentioned the TBS, it's now called FBS, 4 balance sheet crisis. Be that as it may. I asked in Parliament, I stood up and asked Mr. Arun Jaitley, please take the NPAs and tell me how many loans given during the Vajpayee regime have become NPA under the Asset Quality Review, AQR. Number 2, how many loans given to the UPA period have become AQR? And how many loans given after the NDA under Modi took over have become AQR? I said, break it into 3 parts and tell me the numbers. Until today, there is no answer. So where do you get the conclusion that most of these loans were given in the UPA government? Many of them were actually given in the Vajpayee government. And they may have been, what is that called? Evergreening. Some loans were indeed given under the UPA. There was an investment boom. When there's an investment boom, how can credit not go up? But many loans were given even under Mr. Modi, which became NPA. So without data, you can't come to that conclusion. And I've asked for data, and I've not got data.
Good evening, sir. This is Venkateshwaran
We have
from
time
Chanakya.
for 1 or 2 more questions, briefly. Thank you.
I have 2 questions. One is that தற்பொழுது நிலவும் பொருளாதார சூழலுக்கு தங்களுடைய அட்வைஸ் என்னவாக இருக்கும்? இப்போது இந்த சிச்சுவேஷனை சரி செய்ய வேண்டும் என்றால் அரசு ஒப்புக்கொள்ள வேண்டும் என கூறியுள்ளீர்கள். அதற்கு அடுத்தபடியாக தங்களது சஜஷன் என்னவாக இருக்கும்? நம்பர் 1. And number 2, இந்த சிட்டிசன்ஷிப் பில் அமெண்ட்மெண்ட் லாவில் திங் இஸ் தட் அதில் சொல்லியிருக்கிறது ரிலிஜியஸ் பர்சிக்யூஷன் சொல்லிட்டு, அதில் இந்த 3 நேஷன்ஸ்லையும் முஸ்லீம்ஸ் வந்து எப்படி ரிலிஜியஸாக பர்சிக்யூட் ஆகிறதுக்கான சான்சஸ் இருக்குது? அப்படி இருக்கிற பட்சத்தில் முஸ்லீம்கள் ஒதுக்கப்படுகிறார்கள் அப்படின்னு சொல்லி எப்படி சொல்கிறீங்க? தேங்க்யூ சார்.
ரெண்டாவது கேள்விக்கு எளிமையான பதில். பாகிஸ்தானில் Ahmadiyas, Hazaras and Shias are persecuted. Burma, Rohingyas are persecuted. Sri Lankan Indian origin Muslims are discriminated against, maybe even persecuted. அதனால் இஸ்லாமிய நாடுகள், புத்திஸ்ட் நாடுகள் இல்லை, இஸ்லாமிய நாடுகளில் இஸ்லாமியர்கள் மீது பர்சிக்யூஷன் இல்லைன்னு நினைக்காதீங்க. இஸ்லாமுக்குள்ளேயே பர்சிக்யூஷன் இருக்கு. இங்கே தலித் மீது பர்சிக்யூஷன் இருக்குல்ல, இல்லைன்னு சொல்ல முடியுமா? தலித்ஸ் ஆர் நாட் பர்சிக்யூட்டட் யாராவது சொல்ல முடியுமா? ட்ரைபல்ஸ் ஆர் நாட் டிஸ்கிரிமினேட்டட் யாராவது சொல்ல முடியுமா? கேட்டால் தலித்தும் ஹிந்துங்கிறீங்க, அப்போ ஏன் தலித் மீது பர்சிக்யூஷன் இருக்கு? அதனால பர்சிக்யூஷன் தான் டெஸ்ட்னா, irrespective of religion, whoever is persecuted, isn't it? I mean, that's one more argument. Your first question, என்ன யோசனை சொல்றது? யார் எங்களை யோசனை கேட்டா? யோசனை கேட்டா தானே யோசனை சொல்ல முடியும். பிரைம் மினிஸ்டர் வீட்டில இருந்து ஒரு கூப்பிட்டா கேட்கும் டாக்டர் மன்மோகன் சிங் வீடு. ஒரு முறையாவது இந்த 6 ஆண்டுகளில் டாக்டர் மன்மோகன் சிங் அவர்களை அழைத்து தனியா 2 பேரும், மற்றவங்களெல்லாம் கூப்பிட வேண்டாம், வாங்க உட்காருங்க சாப்பிடுங்க, 1 மணி நேரம் பேசிட்டு இருப்போம், என்ன பண்ணலாம்னு கேட்டிருக்காங்களா? ஒரு முறையாவது கேட்டிருக்காங்களா? எங்களையெல்லாம் கூப்பிட வேண்டாம். அப்புறம் ஒரு அறிஞர் தானே, பொருளாதார அறிஞர் தானே. ஒபாமா said, when Dr. Singh speaks, I listen. Why can't Mr. Modi listen? பிரைவேட்டா கேட்கலாம்ல, பிரைவேட்டா கூட கேட்கப்படாதுன்னா அது என்ன துவேஷம் எதிர்கட்சி மீது? Remember, when Mr. Narasimha Rao sent a delegation to the United Nations to explain our stand, he asked Mr. Vajpayee to lead the delegation because it adds credibility to the Indian case. You ask the leader of the opposition to lead the delegation. அவ்வளோ போக வேண்டாம், தனியாக கூப்பிட்டு மரியாதையாக உட்கார வச்சு சாப்பாடு கொடுத்து என்ன பேசிக்கலாமே. 1 மணி நேரம் பேசினா என்ன? யாருமே எங்களை கலந்து ஆலோசிக்கிறது கிடையாது. ஜிஎஸ்டி வரும்போது கெஞ்சினேன் அருண் ஜேட்லியை, ஏன்பா என்ன அவசரம், பில்லை கொடு, நாங்கள் படிக்கிறோம், படிச்சுட்டு அமெண்ட் பண்ணுவோம். பில்லை காட்டவே இல்லையே கடைசி வரைக்கும். கான்ஸ்டிடியூஷன் அமெண்ட்மெண்ட் பில்லை காட்டினாங்க, அதுலேயும் திருத்தம் சொன்னோம். ஒரு திருத்தத்தை ஏற்றுக்கிட்டாங்க, 2 திருத்தத்தை ஏற்றுக்கல. பில்லை காட்டவே இல்லையே, பில்லை பார்லிமெண்ட்டில் தானே காட்டினாங்க. ஏன் எங்களோட உட்காந்து பேசணும்? சரி, இந்த பில் இருக்கே, என்ன அவசரம்? தெரியாமல் கேட்குறேன். ஏன்னா நாடு பற்றி எரிய போதா இந்த குடியுரிமை திருத்த சட்டத்தை 48 மணி நேரத்தில் நிறைவேற்றாட்டி என்ன ஆக போகுது? ஞாயிற்றுக்கிழமை அமைச்சரவை, திங்கட்கிழமை மக்களவை, புதன்கிழமை மாநிலங்களவைனா அன்னைக்கு ஜனாதிபதி எத்தனை மணிக்கு கையெழுத்து போடுறாரு தெரியுமா? மாநிலங்களவையில் பாஸ் பண்ணும்போது 6 மணியோ 7 மணியோ, 12 மணிக்கு கையெழுத்து போடுறாரு. எதுக்காக? மறுநாள் கையெழுத்து போடப்படாதா? Those are questions somebody must answer. Why can't you reflect on these? பில் வர்றதுக்கு முன்னாடியே சொல்கிறோம், இந்த சட்டத்தை கொண்டாடாதீங்க, கலந்து பேசுங்கன்னு. கலந்து பேசுறது கிடையாது. அதனால் யோசனை சொல்லணும்னா யோசனை சொல்லக்கூடிய இடத்துல அறிஞர்கள் இருக்கிறாங்க. யோசனை கேட்டால் தான் யோசனை சொல்லுவாங்க. இங்கே அபிஜித் பானர்ஜி gets a Nobel Prize and he makes a statement. What did he say? I quote his exact words. Somebody asked him, how is the Indian economy doing? He said it's doing badly. அவ்வளவுதான் சொன்னார். Doing badly. Next day, Mr. Piyush Goyal pounces upon him and says, how can you say these things? What do you know about India? This Rahul Bajaj, as usual a maverick, he makes a mild protest. The next day, the finance minister says, you should not make these statements. This is against the national interest to make such personal statements. What is this?
My name is Suresh Subramaniam and I'm a chartered accountant. One of the significant achievements that this current government credits itself for is to the reduction of corruption. I just wanted your views on that, sir. Do you think that's a reality? Does corruption really come down? Or do you think it's only in the BJP-ruled states and not in the other states? What is your view on that?
I would tag along with it electoral funding.
If you think that corruption has come down, you're welcome to live in that make-believe world. Electoral bonds is legalizing corporate corruption. That is the most sophisticated, legalized corporate corruption. It's like making a advanced deposit so that you can draw upon it at any time to get your work done. The donor remains anonymous from the rest of the world. The donee knows who the donor is. 95% of all electoral bond money goes to one political party. I'm not saying if the system remains in place, the next ruling party will also benefit. But the next ruling party will also be equally complicit then. Overruling the Reserve Bank of India, overruling the Election Commission, they introduced the electoral bond, which is why I said in my statement, the steepest fall is in the Election Commission and the RBI. As long as there is this electoral bond, which is legalized corporate corruption, how do you say corruption has come down? Now, leave the central government alone. Are you saying there's less corruption in a collector's office today and less corruption? Take your Ujjwala. You saw the data. There are Ujjwala connections where they've booked 28 cylinders a month. What else is it except corruption? 28 cylinders a month. A Ujjwala connectee. It's a small number, 3 lakhs. Petty corruption remains exactly where it was. Petty corruption remains exactly where it was. Maybe there is some fear about corruption in small transactions. But according to me, according to Jairam Ramesh, the Gujarat State Petroleum Corporation takeover was a clear scam. The sale of BPCL is a clear scam. The privatization of 6 airports, handing over to one licensee, was highly questionable. There are many, many instances. Rafale is a suspect deal. Who benefit, what benefit, we can't say. But it is clearly a suspect deal. But I think to generalize by saying corruption has come down, I don't believe that. You scrap the electoral bond and say this bonanza in favor of the ruling party will no longer continue. I'm willing to concede your point that perhaps there is, at the top level, less corruption. But the electoral bond is the, according to me, the apotheosis of corruption.
And on that note, may I thank our speaker, conversationalist, for giving us the time and answering every question, giving us an insight into his thinking on how India should get out of the present situation. Thank you very much. And
thank you all for coming this evening. Thank you. Thank you for your warm welcome and reception.